morning, everybody. This is Doug, and you're listening to What's the Hazard? It is Friday, December 2nd, I think.
It is.
It is December. Oh, my God. Another year has passed. It's going to be 2023 pretty soon. A couple of things before I introduce my guest today. Number one, it is the season of gratitude. You know, Thanksgiving recently, I had my sons in town, so my wife and boys and my mother, and my brother and his family came over. And as an older man, I am much more in tune with gratitude than I used to be. I think it's at one point I took things for granted, but no, I feel much more gratitude toward what I've been given and the gifts I've been given. And one thing I feel compelled to say is thank you to everyone who has been a part of this podcast, sponsors, current, past, and future, guests like yourself, listeners, everybody that's the folks here at Hurrdat Media in Parkville before that, everyone that's been a part of it. I sincerely appreciate their help because I love doing this. And it feels like we're doing something useful by doing this podcast, by providing this information and this platform, this forum for safety and health information. So I do want to thank John and Matt Falewitch at Falewitch Construction Services. They are a current sponsor of the program. Danni Arroyo with WorkSafe Consulting. She's a current sponsor of the program. All of my past sponsors, Aaron Cerrone, Cheyenne, Wohlford, Kristen Hodge, Lou DeMoro, who am I forgetting? Steve Polich, my good friend Jim Cover, the folks over at Building Omaha. I've just been incredibly fortunate to have so many people support this effort. So thank you one and all. 2023, we're going to be introducing new sponsors. If you've ever dreamed about sponsoring a safety podcast, this is your opportunity. Just give me a holler. Let me know. Anybody that is like-minded and committed to the mission is welcome to be a part of this journey. So thank you for that. The second thing I want to say is thank you to my nephew, Grant, his wife, Hannah, and their son, Jack. They gave me this cool lid. I am one of the few survivors of an encounter with Bigfoot. I don't know if you knew that or not, Tony.
I did not.
And so they have made it their life's mission to provide me with Bigfoot gear. So every time I see my niece and nephew, they give me something. So I got this one recently. So thanks, G. I appreciate it, man. Now let's get to the program. My guest today is Tony Pofahl. You are an executive. What is your title, Tony?
Director. Yeah. Whatever that means. Yeah. You got
WorkFit
it.
Here in Omaha.
Correct. Yeah.
You are an occupational health service provider. You guys do lots and lots of things: injury prevention, injury treatment, physical therapy, drug testing, all sorts of things, education. I would love you to talk about that. We are going to talk about drug testing, which has really always been an interesting activity, and the context of which is interesting from an OSHA perspective. So we'll talk in more detail about that. But if you wouldn't mind, man, first of all, thank you for being here at 9 in the morning.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, man.
Appreciate it.
We've been talking about doing it for a while. And so talk a little bit about yourself, how you came to be in this position, WorkFit, and then we'll talk about some drug testing.
Sure. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I'm a construction guy. You know, I spent most of my professional career in the construction industry, doing different levels of management, everything from the director of training to corporate risk management to project management. And I've been on both sides of the fence, meaning both on the subcontractor side as well as general contracting side. So at the end of the day, I'm a construction guy that one company I worked with, and you know, you're getting old or starting to get old when you start to refer to things in by decades. But about a decade or so, the company I was a part of when I was the risk manager, we were clients of WorkFit. That's been a little while, but anyway, construction guy. As far as what we do at WorkFit, I maybe I should say I've been there right at 3 years. Mm-hmm. It seems like it goes quick. Mm-hmm. But as far as what we do, you covered most of it. I mean, we do we do a lot of different pre-employment services, everything from drug screening to lifting tests, audiograms, respiratory fit, probably 2 or 3 dozen minimum different types of pre-employment services to make sure, one, that you're going to make sure that you're not going to be putting somebody in a bad spot. I mean, nobody wins in the situation where somebody gets injured. So we do all those pre-employment services as well as injury care. And the only injury care we do are for employers. So we're dealing with work comp specifically, or sometimes the employers will pay us direct, but no individuals, if you will. It's all work-related injury care.
Okay.
A lot of times people ask me, so what's the scope of your injury care? And the best way I can describe it briefly is, the best way to look at it is we are like an urgent care for employers. I mean, we do in-house x-rays, we're able to do casting, minor procedures like sutures, stitches, that sort of thing. But we're not an emergency room, but we're basically like an urgent care for employers.
So you can do the diagnostics, many of the diagnostics, things like that. And then you would make referrals perhaps to specialists if need be.
Exactly.
Something to that. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Specialists, surgeons. We do have in-house physical therapy, but depending on where that patient lives, sometimes we'll refer that piece out as well. But yeah, exactly right. We do refer out to.
Nice. And so do most companies avail themselves of some occupational health services, or I know I encounter some of my clients and other employers that I deal with periodically who don't have an occupational health provider. And it seems to be really an integral part of this process. If you don't have one and you are relying on some local, healthcare provider, you are really behind the eight ball, it seems like to me.
Absolutely. And so from my perspective on that is, these big organizations, big construction companies, manufacturers, they have those higher risk industries. They have to pay attention to that stuff because it affects them drastically. But I also make the argument that it affects the smaller organizations as well, with 10, 20, 30, 40 around that area number of employees. They just don't have the resources, nor do they have the understanding. I mean, in those organizations, a lot of people are wearing multiple hats. So one person is their training person, their safety person, production manager, and they can't do it all.
Right.
But the point of the matter is, whether you're a small organization or a large one, it is important. You need to partner with an occupational health facility for a lot of different reasons. One, to reduce costs. Two, it really is a specialized type of care. I mean, you go to an ER or an urgent care, they don't necessarily, not that they don't care, but they don't necessarily connect the dots between, okay, this is what this individual's job is, and relate that back to the injury as it comes down to restrictions and whatnot. So that's why it's important to partner with an occupational health facility.
I love that description too, because it really is a partnership. And I can remember when I was with OSHA and I will call them the current record keeping guidelines came out when they were new. One of the things that was discussed a lot was partnering with your occupational health provider, because there is a consequence to a healthcare provider not understanding that OSHA dynamic. There can be. So the occupational health providers, which is a specialty unto itself, have a better understanding of that and the consequences of, loose diagnoses or kind of loose restrictive work opinions or instructions and things. So it really is critical, and it can have a significant impact on a company to be working with just the local minor medical or
an ER.
Or the ER.
They don't. ER is notorious.
Get them in, get them out.
We're going to overprescribe. We're going to be overly cautious, but that's their role, right?
They have to.
And that's what they're supposed to do.
Right.
But a misnomer as it relates to that versus an OC health clinic is a lot of people don't understand. Say an individual goes to an ER and say it was for a sprain, for the easy conversation, or as an example, the ER may say, okay, I need you to rest for 3 weeks. You're off for 3 weeks. It's been an exaggeration, maybe. However, so say that occurred one night and the next day you bring him to an OC health clinic and the provider sees him and says, okay, no, I think you're okay. Maybe you can do modified duty, or, hey, looking at your job description, I think you're okay to do your job. But the misnomer of that is a lot of people don't understand that the OC health, because it is a specialty and we are the experts, that trumps the ER recommendation.
Exactly.
And so I think that's important to understand. Okay, we're only open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Stuff happens outside of that. But if you are in a situation where you feel like restrictions were issued when they maybe shouldn't have, it's always good to consult with your OC Health and have that patient seen there as well.
Yeah, that's great advice, man. That is great advice because then that's actually written in the regulation, in the record keeping regulation. The medical authority has jurisdiction, that individual or person with greater professional standing in that area of expertise, the occupational health physician versus the ER guy who is literally just, patch them up, stabilize them, move them on, whatever that, whatever they're doing. But that's really good advice because people suffer under those diagnoses, those consequences all the time and don't have to.
Sure.
Probably.
Exactly.
I love that, man. So you have one facility here in Omaha. Is there one WorkFit location or do you have outliers or?
Yeah. So as of today, we have one. I'd like to change that. Our one and only location today is on 77th and Dodge.
Right behind that McDonald's.
You got it. Yeah, you got it.
And not that I've stopped at McDonald's often, but I see your facility regularly.
Yeah.
Usually with a Diet Coke in hand or something, but okay. But you want to put some out in the other communities or what are you hoping to do?
I would love that. I think there's, I would love to have multiple facilities here in the metro. And maybe further down the line, look at other cities. But at the end of the day, who knows where it'll go? But
sure.
that would be my long-term vision.
But you have clients that are outside of the Omaha area?
We do have some. Most of them are in the Omaha metro area. We did have one client as far as Sioux City that was trucking their injured workers down to us to be seen. But most of our clients are right around the metro simply because a lot of what we do, you have to be there in person. It just doesn't make sense to travel too far to have somebody come do a pre-employment drug test or lifting test. So it just makes sense to be here.
Probably plenty of work opportunity here with the folks here in Omaha.
I think there is.
Keeps you guys busy.
Yes.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about drug testing. We talked briefly about this. I know that you guys are doing some training. Drug testing is a really interesting topic to me, and the pros and cons of drug testing from the company's perspective, the benefits. Can you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of drug testing or why a company should consider drug testing?
Sure. And maybe I'd start with just pre-employment services in general. I mean, all those services really are a risk management tool. I mean, it's not going to make you money. It's going to save you money. But the saying goes, a penny earned is a penny. Now, penny saved is a penny earned, right? So we're really a small piece of the whole risk management family of things. So moving on to drug screening specifically, a lot of people shy away from it for a few different reasons. One is it's just one more thing to do, right? And, we could talk about the employment market over the last few years, and we could probably spend the next few hours talking about that. And so with that being said, just having one less thing to do, and it's not super expensive, but maybe that's another reason some people shy away from it. But at the end of the day, whatever pre-employment service you're doing, I mean, it's really a business decision, right? What level of risk and what type of risk are you willing to take on as an organization? Right. It really comes down to that.
Yeah. And that's interesting because OSHA has been, I think most of the studies that I've read, have had access to, suggest that drug testing programs, whether that be random, post-incident, pre-employment, those programs improve overall safety and health practices in your workplace. No question. I mean, everything that I've seen suggests that is the case. And OSHA's expectation is that you provide a workplace free from recognized hazards. So you can't turn a blind eye as an employer to the fact that you might have employees coming in under the influence. I mean, you can't just ignore that fact. And then the liability piece that you just mentioned, if an employee is involved in an incident, a personnel incident or a property damage incident or something under the influence, I mean, there's a great deal of liability that accompanies that, I'm assuming. So I think, as I understand it, the pros certainly outweigh the cons. We had drug testing everywhere I've worked. I was with DOD. We had drug testing, Terracon, drug testing. the Department of Labor with OSHA. We had random drug testing. I can remember getting tapped and said, you need to go down to the clinic and provide a sample. And I think, not that I would have come to work under the influence, but I think that affects your mindset at work, I would think,
Yeah, I would too. And how frequent you're doing the testing and what situations you're doing the testing. At the end of the day, just making somebody know when they first start off, hey, this is part of our policy. That's going to detour many people from going down that path, which I think
or taking the job.
True.
I mean, maybe that, maybe the people that are, well, this is not something I'm willing to sacrifice, will go elsewhere perhaps. And that's probably a good thing, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, we do drug screening for a lot of different reasons. You hit on most of them. I think about the only two that you may not have covered, or let's just go through them all. Pre-employment, DOT consortium, randoms, post-accident, and reasonable suspicion. Those are kind of the reasons why. But in general, there's so many different types of drug screens out there. I mean, we do the most common industry wide is a 5-panel drug screen. The next beyond that is probably a 10-panel, but we do 4, 5, 9, 10, customized. I mean, working with the lab, you can do about whatever sort of test that you want as far as what drugs you're testing, and even customize what sort of thresholds you're looking for. I don't recommend starting to play with those thresholds myself, but at the end of the day, you can. But the reason I say I wouldn't recommend getting that far into the weeds is because there's so many different variables that go into, what's going to show, what's not. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons that we do it. And there's a lot of different types of drug screens. The most typical is a urinalysis, right? That's what most people are doing today. There's hair testing. Not a lot of employers do that. There's also oral fluid testing. And that's something that we have gotten into as of recent. I'd say within the last 18 or so months was the first time we started.
Is that like
offering.
a saliva test?
It is. It is. It's basically like
drool.
Yeah.
A drool test. He's drooling. Test him.
Yes, it's a spit test. So we started doing that, and there's just a couple of our clients who utilize that today. But a big reason that they moved towards that is I'm sure you've seen a lot of these CB, not like I call them smoke shops, right? Advertising Delta 8, Delta 10, and whatever else. So as those shops become more popular and more people are partaking in that, what employers have seen is it's a lot harder to hire people. So what we have seen is a lot of our employers have actually, in some industries that I never would have dreamt, have actually taken out testing for marijuana, or specifically THC, which is a chemical within the marijuana that the test for. So a lot of our clients have taken that completely out. But back to the oral fluid testing, the draw to that to many people, and I see a lot of credence in it, is it shortens the window of detection. And so let's talk about a traditional test. A traditional urinalysis, specifically in regard to marijuana, can show up in the user system, doing a UA for weeks. A lot of times weeks, if not, many weeks. But again, there's a lot of different factors that play into how long it's detected, such as, to name a few, fluid intake, metabolism, body composition, fat, how much fat they have in their body, just to name a few. But
is it fat soluble? I mean, is it stored in body fat?
It's stored in the fat. And so marijuana is one of those few drugs that shows up for an extended amount of time. Generally speaking, most drugs are flushed out of a user system within a few days, sometimes quicker.
Alcohol is an example, or something like that.
Yeah,
perhaps.
Exactly. So most of them are flushed out of your system. But back to oral fluid screening, the draw is, instead of it showing up for potentially a month for ease of conversation, it shortens it down to 6 to 8 hours. And so a lot of employers are saying, okay, let's treat it almost like alcohol. I don't necessarily care what they're doing on their own time, as long as they're not coming under the influence and affecting what they're doing at work. And so I think that's a draw for a lot of employers, is that approach.
It's interesting. I can see why. I mean, to find the presence of THC really has no bearing on the effects. I mean, whether you are under some kind of impairment or
But I mean, there's not a test on the market today that's set like an alcohol test, right? Like a breath alcohol test that says, okay, at this point in time, you're this impaired.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a test on the market as it relates to testing for marijuana today. There's a lot of things in development, but nothing that's been approved and is out on the market yet. I mean, once that becomes available, which I can't believe that in today's day and age, that technology doesn't exist. That's not accurate. It's probably, who knows why it hasn't been released yet. But once that is released and becomes mainstream, it's going to change the way a lot of people handle a lot of their drug screens, I think.
Interesting. That's interesting. So, and even, those body burden levels of some type of drug or alcohol, does it correlate to impairment somehow? I mean, if I'm just I drink every day hard and I can still somewhat function as compared to the person that maybe binges once every 3 months to 6 months. I mean, it's not necessarily a direct reflection of impairment, is it? I mean, I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, you think about, as you describe it, what the term that comes to mind is like a functioning alcoholic, right? Somebody that's drinking every day, all day, but yet they're productive. They're doing the things they need to do. So
get up and go to work.
Maybe that's their typical normal, if you will. But at the end of the day, I'd still argue that what if they weren't? I mean, they're still functioning. So if they were here, as they're functioning, functioning alcoholic, if they weren't, maybe they'd be up here. And that
they're still impaired to some degree,
impaired,
right?
Yeah.
And how else would you make that decision? I mean, really, you can only quantify it to the extent that you're able to, and then use some type of a gauge or guideline to determine that. And are some of them like just the presence or absence? It's just a yes or no. And then, yes, the drug is present, or no, the drug is not present at a detectable level. And, so more of a positive, negative, or I can determine the blood alcohol levels or whatever that might be to a certain quantifiable level.
Sure.
Some are yes or no type.
Yeah, some are yes or no. Some of them. So some of the tests are rapids, right? That's a yes or no. But there's a lot of red tape and legality wrapped around the drug testing process, right? I mean, you're talking about people's livelihoods. You're talking about their being able to obtain a job, in some cases, potentially maintain a job. I mean, so there's a lot of legalities wrapped around it. But yeah, yes or no when it comes to a rapid screen. If it is a potential non-negative, and that's probably a good segue into talking about the actual process as far as what happens, because before I was involved in this industry, I didn't understand how long it could take to actually get drug screen test results back and how that process all worked. It takes longer than most people think. So let's talk about a rapid screen, for instance. A rapid screen, you get those results right away if it shows as a negative. If it shows as a potential non-negative, and that's the technical term because at this point it hasn't been verified that there's something in the system, it's sent off to a lab. The lab will run their test. If it still shows as a potential non-negative, they'll do another set of testing called confirmation testing. And at that point, then they can make a final determination based on that. Is it positive or negative?
Okay.
So at that point, if it is a positive, what happens is a medical review officer gets involved, which is oftentimes referred to as an MRO. Their role is to reach out to the donor, collect any prescription information. They then take that data, compare it to what was the final results that was provided by the lab, and see how they line up. Not only are they seeing do these two line up, they're also looking at the thresholds. They're looking at how much is being prescribed, and then they're able to determine if this person is overusing or not.
Interesting.
So all that to be said, there's a lot of hands on it, and it can take actually up to about 3 weeks to get those final results back. So that's a long time for somebody to be in a state of limbo, and there's a lot of people in the state of limbo during that time. You got the donor, you've got company, an HR department, right? You've got a supervisor. It's like, hey, when's Jim coming back? And so it can drag out.
Jim's wife. Don't
Jim's
forget her.
wife,
She's like,
Jim's kids,
yeah, no
all
doubt.
of those things, and most companies, and I agree with this philosophy or policy, is they will not put that person back to work until those final results are returned, because you don't know. So
if you get a rapid test, and they're colorimetric type tests, probably some kind of indicator on these rapid tests, it changes color, and so that suggests that it's a potential non-negative. If you get the negative on a rapid test, is there a certain level of confidence that it is negative? Then I would assume, I mean, like most tests, like the COVID tests and all that other stuff, there's a certain level of sensitivity, and
there's a lot of different products out there, but they're very accurate. I mean, there's enough regulation around it that they're very accurate. And in that case, our policy is the employer gets those results. If it's a rapid and it shows as negative, they get those results back that right business day.
Okay.
Many times within hours.
Okay. And do you help companies then with the formulation of a drug testing policy? I mean, do you give them some guidance on a standard policy, or is it purely up to the company then to make determinations about how they will utilize and interpret this data, this information?
Sure. I consult with many of our clients in that regard, but at the end of the day, it's their policy.
Ultimately up to them. Yeah. Okay. Are most drug testing policies that you've seen fairly consistent? Are they? Or does everybody do something different? I mean, like you were saying, some people have just eliminated THC as one of the drugs that are being tested for.
Sure.
Maybe because, I mean, just of the likelihood that because of all these new products and things. I mean, I have rubbed CDB paste on my back, for pain and stuff. And so I'm probably never going to pass a test again. Fortunately, at Fletcher Safety, we don't do drug testing, but there are a lot of things that could give you, I'm not false positives because it's positive, but there are obviously context behind some of these findings.
Sure.
So, I mean, I don't know how you would even come up with I think that would be challenging.
It would. I guess my suggestion is always consistency. If you're doing, if you do the same thing throughout the process, no matter what reason you're doing the test, that's at a high level. That's usually my recommendation. Keep it consistent. Yeah,
that's good advice. Well, I know at one time, OSHA, about 2016, when OSHA implemented that electronic reporting requirement, everybody's going to start submitting their data electronically to the agency, purely for statistical reference, not for targeting inspections, of course. But they added that element about drug testing, and they said mandatory post-incident drug testing is discouraged because of the potential for quashing employee reporting of incidents. Okay. And OSHA has always been paranoid that incentive programs, drug testing programs, the mandatory post-incident drug testing specifically, might quash reporting. Okay. And so I can remember when that came out and everybody was like, oh my God, can I drug test anymore? Absolutely. I mean, they certainly don't. There is no OSHA regulation per se for drug testing, but I think the agency always encouraged it because of the effect it had on overall safety of the workplace. But when people develop post-incident programs for drug testing, how do they define incident? I mean, how do you determine and is that across the board too? Companies do their own thing, but how do they determine what incidents will be drug tested?
It is. I mean, it does vary. You probably know better than I do with all your experience working with your clients and stuff. But my perception is it is all over the board. One incident you have incident, accident, injury. I mean, you have all these different terms that people throw around, and a lot of times there's not consistency as far as what's an incident to you, what's an incident to this company. So I'd say it's all over the board.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard companies like property damage, for example. There may not be any type of personal injury as the result of this incident, but there could be property damage, certainly. And so then they have set like dollar amount thresholds. If it's more than $1,000 or appears to be more than $1,000 or whatever that threshold is.
Sure.
The incidents, if it's OSHA recordable, if it requires some type of medical intervention, if it's beyond first aid, whatever that is, I mean, that triggers, I mean, it seems, as you said, I think the one thing that has to be maintained is consistency, uniformity and consistency in your application of the program, so that you don't start putting the company in precarious positions.
Sure.
That's a tough one. I mean, the random stuff seems pretty straightforward. If you have a randomized system of drawing names or whatever, that doesn't seem terribly precarious. And the pre-hire stuff doesn't seem precarious, but the post-incident one seems to be the challenge.
Yeah. I'd say, you're talking about property damage. That's something that I've seen on a lot of occasions. You set a dollar threshold, and if it's over whatever, I mean, I think that's probably fairly common. But if you try to delineate between what's recordable, what's not, and relate that to who's going to be drug tested, guess what? You don't necessarily, until that individual is seen, you probably don't know if it's recordable. Some of them, And
talk about reasonable suspicion a little bit. So OSHA went on to say in that document that Rich Fairfax put out back in 2016 that rather than just across the board post-incident, they would rather see reasonable suspicion drug testing post-incident, which requires training, obviously, right? I mean, so in your professional opinion, would you drug test me? I mean, is there a reasonable suspicion that
anytime I would drug test you every day, all day,
3 times a day at least?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Some of them are going to hit, obviously, but I mean, talk about reasonable suspicion.
Sure.
Do you do that training?
I do. Yeah. Okay. That's a training that I do for many of our clients. I do it several dozen times a year. I really enjoy doing it. But at a high level, it's either a 1 hour or 2 hour long course that I'm speaking to supervisors, managers, anybody that's actually has some sort of responsibility as far as like supervising folks. But you talk about things to look for. And at a high level, that's really just any sort of change. Right. Any sort of change, that's your key to zero in
on behaviors or appearances and stuff. Or
exactly. There's a lot of different. So you talk about all of that, you get into some specifics about the most common drugs used, talk about alcohol. And then finally, you talk about the right process. Should you suspect? I mean, again, there's a lot of red tape there. So you want to make sure your managers and supervisors know who to go to, what are the right steps, all of those sorts of things.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure that there are specific sequential steps that have to be taken in order to go down that road if you do have reasonable suspicion.
I think you mentioned some organizations may look at whether that's post-accident, whether that's property or an injury, whatever the case is. They would rely on their safety professional or somebody to make a call and say, okay, I think they're under an influence. Well, yeah, I think that's a bad idea. Anytime you start relying on somebody to make a call, that's where things get out of whack.
It's pretty subjective.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think it should be every time or no time. That's
and so would you train these managers, supervisors that are going to be asked to evaluate reasonable suspicion? Do you teach them like what I would refer to as a sobriety type tests, or is it like, are you out there, making the employee stand on one foot and touch their nose, or is it purely through conversation and observation?
It's through the latter. I mean, we're not teaching them how to have somebody walk a line, and touch their nose, say the ABCs backwards, any of that kind of things. But it's purely like, all right, look at their eyes. Do they look different? Do you smell any sort of out of the ordinary odors? How they walk and how they talk, and are there any sort of mannerisms that are out of place or abnormal? So those are the things we really touch on. So
this course, if I think everybody would be interested in this, or at least everybody should have exposure to this training. So do you do this out in the community? Do you do it only for WorkFit clients? How do you offer this training?
Sure. So traditionally we have done this, or I've done it just for our clients, but I'm happy any organization that does reasonable suspicion testing and would be interested, whether they're a client or not, I'd be happy to facilitate the training for them as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
So So in Iowa, it's actually required for all organizations that do reasonable suspicion testing. It is required by them. In Nebraska, it's not.
Really?
Correct.
So drink them if you got them in Nebraska, but or whatever.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still the employer's decision as to if they're going to do reasonable suspicion, but the requirement is in regard to the training and training of those supervisors.
Okay. Interesting. That is interesting. So, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording. Have you seen anyone try to like manipulate a drug test? Does anybody ever try to fool the drug test? I mean, do you see those things? I see them on TV all the time. I'm just wondering is that common?
Often. I mean, yeah, we see it a lot. And there's all different ways people can go about it. Everything from, having a bottle strapped to the inside of their leg.
Right.
And you later find a bottle in the trash and like, hey, this doesn't look like a Coke bottle or,
right.
So, but there are a lot of, looking back to even a decade, these tests are a lot more complicated than they were. I think the tests used to be a lot easier to fool and get around than they are today. If I told you that I didn't think there was any way to get around them, that'd be lying. But I think there are, but they're very few and far between. I mean, these tests, you're testing the temperature, and I think that's a lot. That's a lot of times where we catch somebody trying to beat the system as they're out of whack with the temperature.
Ice cold urine.
Right. Or a lot of times
fresh from the tap.
Yeah. Or a lot of times it's even too hot. Or too hot. There's a threshold there where it has to fall in. Otherwise, you retest or start going down that path. But there's not a whole lot of ways. I mean, you can purchase the fake urine online. You can you see these cleansers advertised where it's supposed to flush your system. Some of those may work, but I would have to question what that's doing to your body if it's really getting everything out of your system. So that there's probably always going to be some way to try to cheat the system, but at the end of the day, in today's world, they're few and far between.
They're just way too sophisticated for that. Yeah. I can remember when I would get called upon to go do a random when I was with OSHA. It probably happened. I was with OSHA for 18 years or something, and I probably got tapped 3 times to go give a random drug test or something. And then we would be sent to the clinic. May have been WorkFit, actually. I don't know who OSHA used, or maybe the federal occupational health folks downtown or something, but it would typically be a female nurse who would accompany you to the restroom and then stop, of course, I mean, as they should, I believe, and then send you in and, and
then come back. Yeah.
And then you'd come back with your cup. I mean, whatever that was or something. It wasn't heavily, there weren't a lot of cameras in there, I don't believe.
Right.
And it wasn't heavily scrutinized, but obviously there were temperature and other issues that you could use for, veracity, I suppose.
Yeah. But for pH level. Yeah.
Is there still some privacy involved in the?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the process you described is still the process.
Fairly common.
There are some situations that, and it's outlined in each organization's procedures and protocols. Some organizations, if somebody gives, say, a hot sample or something that seems like something's wrong, we'll actually do an observed collection. But in most cases, that's very few and far between.
Yeah. What about I hear a lot of people when I go to give presentations, safety and OSHA stuff. One of the things that we talk about commonly is discipline. Having a discipline program is something that OSHA expects of employers, and you have to surveil your workplace. And when you observe deviations from policies or safe work practices, you're supposed to intervene. And people have told me that they don't know how to discipline employees anymore. What you alluded to in the very beginning, these staffing issues that we're somewhat challenged by now. If I discipline an employee for violating a policy, they walk. They just leave, Has the same been true with drug testing of late? Do the employers that you work with have these same concerns about, do I keep my drug testing policy or do I eliminate everything but whatever the most heinous propofol, or I don't know what the most heinous drug would be, but I mean, are they becoming more lenient because of their fear of eliminating the majority of their workforce, or what have you been seeing?
Sure. So looking back, and I keep going back to a decade, maybe around a decade or so ago, it wasn't uncommon for an employer, if somebody failed a drug or alcohol test, to be automatically terminated, right? Today's world doesn't work like that. There's still organizations out there that is their policy, but more organization anymore refer them to their employee assistance program. They're like, hey, we're going to try to help you out, right?
Which seems humane. It seems like a reasonably humane approach.
I think so. But I think, employers have definitely, employees hold the cards today, right? And have for the last few years. And that hasn't always been the case. So that's employers have had to get really creative on how they discipline, what they're willing to take on from general behavior perspective or drugs, all of those things.
Yeah, it is interesting. The entire dynamic of the workplace is so different than probably when you started, and certainly when I started. It's much different and much more nuanced and probably much more challenging, because it was very black and white back in the day. You're out,
Yeah.
You said something they didn't like, you're out. You didn't pass a drug test, you're out. I mean, it was just, it was rough.
I think a manager today has to have a much higher, an effective manager has to have a much higher level of emotional intelligence. Looking back to the old days where it was like, okay, you do your stuff. If you don't do your stuff, we're going to find somebody else. Right. You can't do that today.
Yeah.
Or there's not organizations that are in a position to do that.
Yeah, this is why not only do we not have a drug testing policy at Fletcher Safety, we don't have employees at Fletcher Safety, because I couldn't do any of that shit, man. I mean, when I was a manager at OSHA, that was the worst part, the personnel stuff, the technical stuff, the coordination stuff. I didn't mind that at all. Even dealing with the outcomes of my compliance officer's inspections, that was fine. But the personnel issues haunted me.
Sure.
I hated that stuff. I have the utmost respect for managers that have found a good way to balance these things, because it is incredibly difficult, man. And which is why we have people like you that can help them with these kind of things, with things like the occupational health, the drug testing. I mean, it's just, we have a world that is so complex that everybody needs help.
Yeah.
You can't be an expert in all these things.
And there's no two situations that are the same. There's always some little nuance that makes it different.
So talking about some of the other things, I think the drug testing stuff is really interesting. I would be curious to hear what people are doing with drug testing. So at some point, if you feel like dropping me an email or making a comment to this at the end of, like, when we push this episode out, I'd be interested to hear the challenges that people are faced with now. But one of the things that you talked about, and I'd like to just touch on briefly, is some of the other occupational health services that you guys offer: respiratory protection, fit testing, audiometry, hearing conservation, those kind of things. Very common. Most workplaces probably need those things. And oftentimes when I'll tell somebody, well, have your employees been fit tested? And I get that deer in the headlight look, it scares me, man. So do you still have people coming to you that are like, I didn't realize we had to do this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Does that still exist?
Yeah, they do. And specific to respiratory fit tests, a common question that comes up is pulmonary function test required, right? I mean, the point of a PFT is to make sure somebody's healthy enough to utilize the respirator, right? And so, you correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is a PFT is not required, though at least my opinion is, if you're going to put somebody that's in a position where it's restricting their breathing, it's an absolute best practice.
No doubt. Yeah, totally. And you're absolutely correct on all points. Yeah. But it is, I think, up to the discretion of the provider. OSHA has always, here's the questionnaire, complete the questionnaire. If you happen to have any negatives on here, we're not actually going to give you the job or allow you the work. So wink, wink.
Right.
Make sure you say no or yes, whatever the correct answer is to everything.
Sure.
So I'm not sure I would rely on a questionnaire alone. Before I put somebody, particularly if they're working in hazardous materials areas, PEL level exposures.
Yeah.
That would scare the crap out of me.
Yeah, me too. I mean, if you're trying to check the box, okay, the questionnaire is fine. I mean, you're relying on that person to accurately complete that, and keep in mind they're trying to obtain a job.
Right.
So
yeah, I can do all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if you're trying to check the box, that's the answer.
Yeah.
If you're trying to actually look out for the liability for you as the employer, as well as take care of that potential candidate and your current employees, I actually do the PFT.
Totally agree, man. Test. Yeah, totally agree. Now, did you have to do spirometry back in the day when you were a working man?
I did not.
Okay, because we had to do that every year for our physicals with OSHA. And for anyone who has not done the pulmonary function test, the spirometry that Tony's referring to, it's not easy.
It's not easy. No.
And to pass requires that your performance on each round, like you have like 3 rounds of the spirometry that meet within a certain percentage. Typically, that was the OSHA guideline. And to get 3 of them that would be within that range, it would take me 10, 12 goes on that. And normally I would just pass out and slam my head into the wall or the floor or something.
Right.
It was brutal.
Yeah, it's a tough test. I mean, you see people turning red, or or like
breathe. I can still hear it.
I haven't seen anybody pass out yet, but yeah, it's not an easy test. So yeah, that's one of the things that we do. But let's talk about pre-employment and even ongoing screenings, where we talk about respiratory fit test, pulmonary function test, audiograms, all of those things. I mean, at the end of the day, you're trying to protect yourself and that individual.
Right.
And those things that are not necessarily just a pass fail, those things that actually have where you're measuring a level, from a risk management perspective, that's really important. So you can track that for those tests that are required annually, or
like
or every
blood
other
leads, for example, or something like that.
It's important to have a baseline, and for all those reasons I described, but it also comes down to your bottom line as well as a business. A good example that I throw out there in that regard would be a lifting test, right? So say you go to hire somebody. So let's step back. Say you go and hire somebody. You don't have any sort of baseline where they started. It's a physically demanding job. They get injured. All right. So now say this claim or this injury blows up, needs surgery, all those things. Now all of a sudden you have nothing to look back on to say, where did this person start at from the time when they came to us?
Yeah, right.
So to me, from a risk management perspective, that's one of the biggest values, or the most important reason to do the pre-screening, is you have to have that baseline. Otherwise, it's all yours.
So that's an interesting comment. So if you don't necessarily have people that are in medical surveillance, and I'm going to refer to that as the respiratory protection or hearing conservation, or maybe even if they are working with silica, lead, or something where we might have some type of requirement to do periodic testing. If you don't have people that are in medical surveillance specifically, but you still want to have a baseline of their functional capacities and things like that, they should still be evaluated, at least at the start of employment, at that initial employment period, just to know what you've got, so to speak.
Yeah, at a minimum, if it's any position that's even remotely physically demanding, just having that baseline, some people call it a back screen, which is, people use a lot of different terms: back screen, musculoskeletal exam, lifting screen, all one and the same to me. But those things are very important.
Yeah, they would be, absolutely. Do you have clients in both construction and general industry?
We do,
across the board.
Yeah, we service around 500 employers around the metro area, ranging from clients that have 5 employees all the way up to clients that have several thousand, across all industries. The majority of our clients are in higher risk industries, such as construction, manufacturing, meat processing, anything along those lines where somebody's actually working with their hands day in and day out. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And so do you do any on-site services? I mean, I know you do training. You'll go out to the facilities and do training, or do they come to you for that training?
I typically go to their facilities. From time to time, I do it on Zoom. I much prefer doing it in person.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's my go-to. But I usually go to their facility to to facilitate that training. As far as other on-site services, I mean, we'll do flu clinics, we'll do on-site drug tests for random programs. But that's the majority of the on-site things we do. Okay. Outside of that, I mean, we go out, we'll do ergonomic assessments on-site.
Interesting. Okay.
Job assessments. We'll go out there, do initial walk of the facility to observe what's going on, so we can accurately build those lifting tests based on, take measurements
on the actual works being performed.
Exactly. Yeah. So we can accurately build those screens.
Yeah.
I think one piece, let's step back to those lifting tests. That's the easiest way to refer them to them. I mean, if you're doing lifting screens, it's important to review those annually. And I think that's a piece that a lot of people, they set it and forget it. Right. And that's a bad approach. There's you should be analyzing what your pass fail rate is. You should also be looking at, digging further into those weeds. It's not something to set and forget. Jobs evolve, people change, all of those things. So it's important to reevaluate those and adjust those screens if need be.
So even employees that, as employees age, their capacities obviously change. I know my capacities have changed significantly since I was, 20 years old, obviously. And so is there a recommendation for that? Is that kind of what you're referring to? Like, can Doug still do the job, or has the job changed, requiring different skills and capacities, or a combination of those things? Or
sure, generally those are all done at pre-employment. So say you've worked for an organization for say for 20 years, most people wouldn't have you go do a back screen every 5 years or whatever.
You would not. Okay.
Most companies would not. Okay. And quite frankly, I don't think you can.
Is that illegal?
I don't think you can.
Get your shit and get out, you piece of shit.
Yeah. So I legally don't think you can do that.
That makes sense.
But usually what happens though is that sometimes drifts towards like a fit for duty. So many people utilize fit for duties for a lot of different reasons, right? We do them. So that could be, somebody could be away from work, whether that was a personal injury, a surgery, it could be a work-related injury. It could be, say they were out for a month with COVID, whatever reason they were away from work.
I see.
And you as an employer says, okay, I'm concerned Doug is not going to be able to safely do his job when he comes back. Then you would come to our facility, do a fit for duty. So I guess where I'm going with that is a lot of times that would kind of be the catch-all. Something has happened. And then that fit for duty is like, okay, that's your chance as an employer to reanalyze or to analyze it. Okay, can this person actually do the job safely? Come back to this job safely?
Yeah, that's a great, yes. Okay. And there is a distinction between what I was saying and what you're describing. Someone returning to work or someone who's had some type of an issue or incident or something, to determine whether or not that capacity still exists or if that has changed somehow.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, and I know that, those are issues that also most employers need help with. They need consultation with. Can I return Doug to the same job? And so we have always, as an OSHA person and as a consultant, we always recommend having that strong, intimate working relationship with your occupational health provider, so that we know the details of these things. Like, you can get into the weeds on some of those things and make those decisions rather than just having someone who is completely unfamiliar with occupational health and or your workplace making those decisions for you.
Yeah, it truly is a partnership, right? At the end of the day, if our clients don't succeed, that does nothing good for anybody, right? So it truly is a partnership.
Yeah, it's cool. Good, man. We're way over the hour.
We are?
We're over the hour. It always takes about 10, it seems like 10 minutes go by. This is really interesting stuff. And, I think that when we talk about this workplace safety and health thing that we've been talking about for 3 years on this show, the occupational health support piece is such a critical part of the program, and it gets overlooked sometimes, but it's, as you described it, the partnership is really critical. It's a resource that, everybody probably needs, frankly, as you said, from the small 3 to 4 to 5 person shops all the way up to the huge organizations. Everybody needs this expertise in their partnership, so where do people find you, man? You have a website? I mean, they probably already know that you exist. I think most of the people that are at least in our area here, I mean, the people that are listening in maybe perhaps Africa or Europe are not familiar with WorkFit. But
sure. Yeah. Our website is www.workfitomaha.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
They need to check it out. I mean, everybody needs to have a go-to resource for this stuff.
Absolutely.
Love it. It's good stuff, man. And so we're not going to do any drug testing this morning. I think we're going to pass on that today just for the sake of my company as a whole. But thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure getting to know you, man. We've known each other since you took that job at WorkFit.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of run in the same circles now. And it's very interesting stuff. So thank you for what you guys are doing, keeping the workforce healthy. It makes my life easier when the workforce is fit and healthy and working within their capacity. You know, so it is a partnership. So it's a good deal, man. Have a good weekend. Thanks for listening, guys. Again, thank you to everyone who supports the program. Sounds like National Public Radio almost, you know. Send in $1, God damn it. And we'll keep doing it. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.